Yes, so this first event of the Conscious Learning Festival features Sarah Bittle, who is here with us at the moment. And Wendy and I will start off by asking Sarah a few questions as regards her journey in the Deep Adaptation Forum in different areas, and what happened after Sarah steps down as moderator from the main Deep Adaptation Facebook group, as well as from the practical Deep Adaptation group, I believe, and what happened afterwards. And we will invite everyone to just ask questions afterwards. And so, yeah, that's how we plan to do things. So Sarah, would you like to begin with introducing yourself a little bit and saying a few things about what your journey into Deep Adaptation and the Deep Adaptation Forum has been?
Sure. Again, I'm so sorry I was late, and I'm deeply honored that anybody cares anything about what I think about anything. So, okay, well, I guess I've said to Dorian several times. I think I came to this very much not as an activist or even an environmentalist. I'm now nurse practitioner, and I've always cared deeply about social issues, and I suppose in some ways have done some activism, but anything I've done has always been more about like service and children, and because I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner and I was a Montessori teacher prior to that, and so my focus has always been more about like children's well-being, children's health, and I felt like I don't really have a good activist personality, I think. So I always was much more focused on service, direct service. And I think, it's not really true that I wouldn't have gotten involved without Trump being elected, but there is some truth to that, because I think like a lot of people, I really started paying much more attention to online news after Trump was elected, just so sort of horrified that it had happened. And you pay attention to your newsfeed long enough, you pick up a lot of stuff about the environment. And I think I had kind of come to a lot of the deep adaptation ideas. And when I read Jem's paper, and I was searching it out too, because I kept reading things thinking, like nobody's talking about, we're all talking about what the physical realities are, but nobody's talking about like how are we even capable of addressing climate change as a species? And I didn't feel like anybody was talking about that. Like it's fine and all, remediation and carbon capture and blah, blah, blah. That's all great, but we're not great at cooperation. And so when I read Jem's paper, it was really refreshing, because I felt like here's somebody who's thinking about not just how close we are to disaster, but how hard it is for us as a species to address something like this. I mean, never address something like this. The comparison that often gets made is to World War II and the Allied forces, but that's not a fair comparison, because this is much bigger than that. I don't have to tell anybody who's attending this event that that's the case. So I actually first started a Facebook page without Jem's permission, and then was like, oh, wait, maybe I shouldn't do that. And so contacted him directly, and he asked me if I would be willing to moderate. And so I did. And I really loved it for a while. But then my coursework got more intense, and I was trying to finish my degree, and I just had to step back. And since then, deep adaptation has always been on my mind. I feel like it informs everything I do and say. That said, we all get trapped in our lives. I mean, I'm right now really struggling with my first year as a nurse practitioner, which has been a really huge transition, and one that's had a lot of bumps in the road. And so I'm still much more focused on that. And the reality is, I have a child. I have husband who is a classic boomer, and I still can't, I mean, forget truly living, like my friend Jane, in many ways, who was nice enough to remind me that I was late. She lives the life that I wish I could be living in deep adaptation, which is really truly living with the principles of it and learning how to be self-sufficient. Um, I have a husband who buys disposable paper and plastic products, and I couldn't even begin to get him to stop. There would be no way. So I think there's a real tension probably for a lot of us in our lives about the people we love and trying to get them to accept this idea, and how hard do you push, and is that what you really want to do with whatever time we have left? And so it's like an ongoing dialectic in my own head about that. So that's where things are right now.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So you mentioned thinking about the principles of deep adaptation even now in your life. And as a nurse practitioner, you must have been completely engulfed in this huge maelstrom of the COVID-19 pandemic in the US health system. So I'm curious as to whether the ideas or the philosophy of deep adaptation, or perhaps the future that deep adaptation invites people to envisage, is something that has been present for you in this period of COVID-19, and if so, how?
Yeah. I mean, I got off a lot easier than many of my colleagues. I was when it started, I was an OR nurse, which meant that I didn't have like a lot of direct patient care contact with COVID, because they canceled, and I was in ambulatory surgery, which is mostly elective surgeries or surgeries that aren't, emergency, obviously. And so, my regular work was shut down here in the United States. And they transferred us all to different departments within my organization. At that time was Kaiser Healthcare. So at that point, I really didn't have a whole lot of direct contact with patients with COVID. But my husband and son, my husband is, he's quite a bit older than I am, and he has a lot of underlying health conditions. And so he had to take my son to our family beach condo when it all first started, because I couldn't risk infecting him. And so they were gone for 2 months. I didn't see my son for 2 months. I didn't see my husband for 2 months because of my need to, and the duty I felt I had to try to help in whatever way I could, even though I didn't have a lot of skills at that point. Now I do have a lot more contact with COVID patients. I do at least 10 COVID tests a day on little kids. Luckily, at this point in Maryland, where I'm at, we have really good vaccination rates. So I actually haven't had a kid pop positive for COVID in several weeks. But in terms of how I think about COVID with deep adaptation, when it first started, I can so clearly remember that there was a point in which I was at a clinical, which is where where I was for my my degree. I was in a pediatrician's office working, and we were all watching TV, and I thought to myself, so this is how it starts. This is how it really, really starts. I mean, and who can say, but if you think about it in a sort of narrative way, I think in some ways this is where it starts. This is where the consequences of how we've behaved on the earth start really biting us back, and not just a select few, although God knows this pandemic has hit people of color and communities of color and countries in the Southern Hemisphere far worse than it's hit us. But this is how it starts. This is how we all start getting affected by that. We're encroaching on, wildlife that we should never touch, and also there being too many people and also close together. And I just said, yeah, this is the beginning. And I still feel that way. I still feel like, even as we thought we were all coming out of it now, but we're still not, because of the vaccination rates. And, when I'm trying to convince patients to get a vaccination, DA is very much in my mind, because I think to myself, this is the beginning. And if we're not careful, this will be the driver. because, you know, nobody saw Delta coming. Well, I mean, I think people in health saw Delta coming, but it's like every person who's unvaccinated is an incubator for this thing. And it keeps turning and changing and changing. And at any moment, it could be something far deadlier than it is. So I still feel like this is the beginning of the collapse in a way. Now, how much it will contribute, I don't know, but I do still think about it that way.
Thanks, Sarah. Do you have a sense that the health system might become more resilient as a result of this shock of the pandemic, or on the contrary, has
it's broken? It's completely broken now. We can't, I mean, the things that are not being, I mean, and I can only speak of my experience in this country, but, and, you know, we all know that the US did just a horrible job. And it's a shame because I think in years past, it was in a position to do a magnificent job with something like this. But because of the political climate, it's done a horrible job. It's always been a broken system in many ways because we don't serve the people who need healthcare the most, and we parcel it out as a consumer good. But like I've got, you know, so now I'm in a pediatric practice with like a lot of, you know, very vulnerable people. Most of the people I see in my particular practice are Hispanic immigrants. And I mean, I've got kids who have serious developmental issues and have serious, you know, mental health issues. I mean, I see so many girls have been hit, and this is statistically true. There've been several studies for mental health. Girls have been hit way worse with this. And I see girls who come in, and I always joke that I say that they look like the villain in the Ring movies, you know, because they've got their hair all over their face and they don't want anybody to see their face, and they're super depressed. I can't get them counseling. I can't, because the waiting list and every resource we've got for health is so strapped at this point. Nobody is getting the services they need. My husband can't get an echo. I'm a nurse practitioner. He's got a bum ticker, and we can't get him an echo of his heart to check and see how he is, because it's so broken, because there's this backlog of people and they're trying to triage it, and it's just broken in every possible way. So again, that's why I keep saying I think this is the beginning of collapse. When you see that, how long does society hold together when you can't get a hospital bed anymore? Like, because that's where things keep going is, you know, we thought we were through that. But then here in this country, they had to airlift an infant out of Houston, which is a major metropolitan area, because they did not have a NICU bed for that baby with COVID. So how long are people going to not start rioting? Or at the very least, I just have to think there's going to be a lot of civil strife when you can't get a hospital bed.
I hear you, Sarah. I really hear you. I'm wondering if any of your experiences in the conversations you must have seen in the early days in Deep Adaptation in the Facebook group are things that enriched your language and your mental language around how you're looking at problems like this, because it's a lot to face down. But it kind of sounds like you did a lot of work in Deep Adaptation, and you're bringing some of that work to watching this go down. I mean, you're doing as much as you can, but it is broken.
It's broken, and I think, you know, there's trying to think exactly how to put this. I mean, and I think it's an experience we all have, in that if you do accept this truth, you can't talk about it. I mean, you can't talk about that with the people that you're working with. You can't talk about, I mean, I can't even really talk about it with my husband. Like I said, he thinks I'm overreacting. And so you can't talk about it with your family necessarily, at least I can't. You can't really talk about it with your coworkers. And, you know, if I was to try to say everything I just said, you know, that I think that this is one of the stepping stones towards us getting to some kind of societal collapse. You know, people look like you're crazy. So I think being in Deep Adaptation really helped me, just in terms of, you know, even though I'm not necessarily in it anymore, and I don't, you know, except for Jane, and God, I've been a terrible friend to Jane. Oh God. there's not anybody for me to really talk to about that. Sorry, I sort of lost my train of thought for a second, but yeah, just already being used to the idea that, okay, I can't talk about this at work. There's no one who's gonna be on the same page as I am, but at least I know that there is a community of people that when this gets too bad, know what I'm talking about, and are on the same page and understand how this is not sustainable, and that we're headed for something and we really ought to be preparing for it. But I will say, I feel as if, particularly I think because of all the weather events this year, there is some dawning realization that this isn't going to be an easy fix, and there may be no fix. So it's been really good for me to just know that there are a group of people, so because that way you just don't feel like you're the crazy person walking around going, this guy. No, other people who you actually respect and have great affection for also think that.
Sarah, do you know that your group that you started has about 13,100 members today?
That's really cool. I mean, cool, in the sense that any group about the end of the world is cool. I mean, but it is funny to think about that we started with just a few people and that it's expanded so much so fast. But I mean, I wish I could help more, and I wish I could make it expand more, because it's an idea that I think people really need. They don't want it. I think a lot of times they don't want it, because who wants to face this? But they need it.
I want to say, from my perspective, I was a moderator for a short time with the team, and Jane's been on it, hard at work since you were there. They do an unbelievable job, and
I'm
just
sure
welcoming so many new people coming in at the moment with such a lot of pain. So I have to say, from me, thank you so much for the work that you did.
Oh.
I encouraged Jem to start a Facebook group, because I would guess that that's not Jem's normal mode.
Well, he
and
was
Mink's not as welcoming.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, he was a little skeptical at first. I think he was like, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was kind of like, I don't know if this is the right venue for it. And I was like, and I just like, well, I want to do it, so let's do it. So that was kind of how that went.
Why Facebook?
This crazy American like contacting him out of the blue. But well, I guess I was that crazy American, so fair enough.
If I can come in and just reinforce that, Sarah, I don't know when it was I joined, but it was rather early on the Facebook group. Must have been November, December or something of that year. And just to reinforce what Wendy said, I really appreciated the tone and the way you tackled boundary dynamics on that Facebook page early on, because you were just quite fine to reach right in and grab people by the weak bits and say, look, this is not what we do here, and you did it in a very good, but very, very firm and clear way. Well, and there was a lot of that going on early in the group, and it was really required to create the vessel that has allowed that thing to grow and become a supportive community. And I just really wanted to appreciate that. That's one of the main reasons I showed up this evening, is really just wanted to see you in person and say that. So
thank you. That's really nice of you. I mean, has the tone changed at all? I guess that would be a question that I have, is like, has the tone changed at all? Because while, I mean, I've left social media altogether. I mean, and I think that's in some ways been part of my deep adaptation journey, is I don't want to spend whatever time I have left on this planet. I mean, that's a reasonable thing to say, I think, at any point, whether you believed in deep adaptation or not. But I mean, like, how much time do I want to spend online getting mad about stuff? Because that's what it comes down to a lot of times. And so while I miss deep adaptation particularly, I have not missed social media generally. And so how's the tone now? Is it more supportive? Because I didn't miss the aggressive stuff after I left it all.
I wonder if Jane would like to answer.
I think it's quite supportive, personally. I mean, there's people that get annoying, but that's going to always be the case. And also, the Practical DA group has over 2,000 members. And so people go there for that. There's also a parenting group and a women's group now. And so there's more DA spaces. Plus there's all this Zoom stuff that's happening. There's support groups and all kinds of things. It's a little overwhelming, actually. keeping up with all of it.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. In the beginning, I think it was so, it reminds me a lot of, so when I first got involved, well, when I met my husband, who is a jazz musician, it was because we both wound up on the board of a local radio station here in DC, and that was also, it's a Pacifica station. And I mean, like, we would go to meetings, and I think we both kind of looked at each other like, oh, look, you're the only other sane person in this room. And because I mean, like, I would go to those meetings and they were supposed to be 3 hours, and people would wind up, 6 hours of yelling, screaming, throwing chairs, things like that. So I think I got to the DA face group and I'm like, well, this is familiar. It's just an online version of the same thing. And I mean, I can still remember those particular people, like in the beginning, some of whom we had to eventually kick out of the group. It was like this constant kind of like, they say something and you're like, oh, here we go again. And you have to go deal with them. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that it's better. I'm really glad to hear that it's better, because at the end of the day, I think an absurdist attitude actually helps the most when you're dealing with deep adaptation, like a true absurd. That's why I think at one point I did that whole like movies of the apocalypse kind of thing, because I mean, okay, the sky's falling. The sky is really truly falling, and none of us survive it. So we might as well have a good time going out, and watch a few movies and have a few laughs.
I missed that movies of the apocalypse thread. I'm not on Facebook much myself. It sounds fun.
Probably still there. You can go back. Yeah, I just started picking up any movie I could think of that like had an apocalyptic or environmental theme, and started just doing little blurbs on them and recommending them, and people were like, great. That was like, some people were like, that's my favorite part of this group. I was like, really? Because all I'm doing is just talking smack about movies. Oh, by the way, though, if nobody has seen it, because I think the second season is coming out next week. I watched this week for the first time the most amazing Netflix series that made me think so much of deep adaptation, called Frontera Verde, and it's about
Terra Verde.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It kind of flew under the wire because it's like a Colombian Brazilian show, and it takes place in the Amazon, and it has a lot of and at the beginning it's very confusing, but the plot is very much focused on the indigenous people of the Amazon, and how they are sort of reacting to everything that's happening around them. And I watched it and I was like, this, if I was still doing, movies for deep adaptation, this would definitely be big on my list, because I thought it was really fantastic.
Sarah, do you know that
Thanks.
there's even a film circle that someone has started? It hasn't
Really?
too much, but yeah, it sounds like something we need to send you an invite to, in case you sometimes have an hour or two to.
So what kind of stuff do you do? What kinds of things do you do?
I'm trying to remember if anyone, Darren, you're better at names than I am. Stephen Raskin has been sharing some super clever, quite old movies, I think, that have like really funky themes, really complex themes around apocalypse. One was a plague movie about New Zealanders. Just some.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, many of the films actually have a connection with indigenous peoples, in fact, or indigeneity. Right. So I think the movie you referred to, Wendy, is called The Navigator, and it's the story of a young boy. Right. Gwen, you're in the circle, right? You were there in the discussion, I remember. Yeah, he travels to New Zealand to try and find a remedy for a plague.
Yeah,
there was one about Aboriginals.
I guess what it is you do there is you send the link around, everyone has a chance to watch it, and then you come together and discuss it, right?
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. I mean, again, it's sort of strange to think, like this is what we might do on the way out of the apocalypse, but and we're we're whistling while the Titanic sinks, but we can't. I mean, we can try. I'm not saying I'm not trying. I wish I did more to try to keep the Titanic from sinking. And maybe we, and if we think about it as like a Titanic thing, I do think about like, well, okay, the ship's going down, but can we get some lifeboats in place, so that maybe a few people survive? But at the same time, man, it's going down, so we might as well have a few laughs. The band will play on.
Absolutely. And I know some some people even use role playing or storytelling to explore stories of the future. Yeah, in the Deep Adaptation network,
That's
there's
really
all kinds of interesting ways of doing that. I don't
I
know
had-
if yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
no, sorry. I had a really interesting revelation recently with my son. So my son acts physically so much like his father. There were times that I wondered, God, did I get a clone? But recently I realized his way of thinking is a lot more like mine. And you know, and with a friend of mine, we were talking about it. It's like, and I realized suddenly that there are some of us who are narrative thinkers and some of us who aren't. You know, and it's a cognitive framework, and it's not. I don't think it's something that you teach. I think it's something that it's just like it's a temperament kind of thing. And so as I think about deadaptation a lot, I think about like that there's a story we need to learn how to tell if we do hope that there is going to still be human life on this planet. I think we need to start, at least those of us who think narratively, the only way to get through is to start thinking about, okay, well, what would that future look like, and who are the people in that future, and to kind of write stories about it, and explore story making about it. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials novels, which are, oh my God, so dear to my heart. Like literally, if I had a daughter, I would have named her Lyra. And you know, he has that saying in the last book about like, if you don't have stories, you don't have human beings. We aren't human beings without stories. Mm-hmm. So I think it makes a lot of sense for me as people process this information. I mean, like I know reading Octavia Butler was, you know, and then, oh God, and Kunstler, I think it is that Jane hips me to, you know, books like that, I think have really helped me sort of come to terms with it. And I think as we try to spread this idea of deep adaptation, we need to start really looking at storytelling, because that's how people come to an idea. You know, you can beat them over the head with it, but storytelling is really what will draw the average person into understanding this concept.
Yeah. So Sarah, can I ask you a question? Have you got a particular story? You've given us some, but from your deep adaptation days that you would propose was like a major part of you forming a narrative that kind of made sense for you, or have you written your own?
Well, the Octavia Butler stuff really is a huge. I mean, the parable of the sower, I think, was huge in me coming to understand. And you know, and I said, I think his name's Kunstler. There was another novel that Jane recommended to me that I read, and I can't think of it at the moment. So never mind, I shouldn't have brought it up. I mean, I thought about movies like, so one of my favorite deep adaptation movies that I did was one called Delicatessen, which I hadn't watched since, you know, it came out in the early 90s, excuse me, but always loved it. And I love that filmmaker. And just the humor of it, I think humor as a way to lighten what this is, because this is huge. And so, you know, the silliness of that movie, I think really kind of let me take a breath and yet sort of accept this idea. But the parable of the sower was a big one. And, you know, I don't know, I haven't really talked to anybody about this, but I am sort of like working on a children's story. I don't know that it's ever going to go anywhere, because it's also got like a lot of different aspects to it. I guess I got really inspired reading Philip Pullman, but it, you know, so it's not just about one thing, but there's definitely, I would say that the background to it is very much about deep adaptation, you know, trying to find a way to make it so it's not just another apocalypse story. But yeah, I mean, I think storytelling is how we're going to process this. I really, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody here has read Parable of the Sower, but I think more than anything that helped me.
Thanks, Sarah. I was very touched by that, by that novel myself.
Yeah.
I know that some of us here in the room are also quite involved in stories, news stories and storytelling. Please feel free to jump in with any comments or questions and questions about anything else, or remarks. The floor is wide open, so please don't hesitate. Gwen, go ahead.
Your mention about some people are storytellers reminds me of a Canadian researcher.
Oh no, you froze. You froze for a second. Sorry.
Maybe try repeating what you just said, Gwen.
Sorry. It reminds me of a researcher named Michael Chandler, Canadian, who was investigating actually suicides among Indigenous Canadian youth, and because they were much higher than Euro-Canadian youth. And what he discovered, one of the things he discovered along the way was that when you asked youth, who are you? The Euro-Canadian youth would give you a list of characteristics, and the Indigenous youth would tell you a story. And what he eventually found was that the highest suicide rates among Indigenous youth took place in towns or communities where there were no Indigenous adults in charge of the government, and that where there were Indigenous adults in places of importance and power, the suicide rate of youth went way down. And, clearly it seemed to me that what was going on was that what kind of a story can you tell about who you are if you don't see any adults doing important things? And so I was reminded of what you were saying and the importance of storytelling.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it makes so much sense, but it's amazing to think that somebody went and did a study like that and found it so clearly. Yeah. I mean, again, just, I keep going back to that thing that Philip Pullman, I mean, there's this, again, there's no human beings without stories. And there's a part that I always cry when I read that book about, as this woman is about to she's been trapped in this netherworld, and she gets released, and sort of her atoms dissolve into the air. And her last words are, just tell them stories, tell young people stories, but tell them true stories, and everything else will be okay. And, I don't know that everything else will be okay, but I think we need stories. I just read recently, I thought this was incredible too, especially in a deep adaptation context, that at one point they do think that the human race was almost extinct and down to something like a population of 600 couples, basically. I mean, of course, all the other people around them, but 600 childbearing couples, essentially, down in the Horn of Africa, I think it was. And that was just a magazine article, but I think to myself, God, what an incredible story that would be. Like, if you could write that story, if you could take that little snippet and make a story out of it. Because God, I mean, how remarkable. And I think especially in terms of deep adaptation, to think, okay, I mean, I know some people within the group were very much focused on the idea that the world would be better off without us. And I think there's an argument to be made there, certainly. But I still do cling to the idea that we are unique in the universe, and that there's something here worth preserving, and that we can, whatever happens next, we've been very close to the brink of extinction before, and maybe it's possible for us to find a way back through. It will be with more suffering than we have the cognitive ability to understand, but it's possible, and we can tell that story. That's a story worth telling.
I have a question for you, Sarah. Oh, actually, a statement. Thank you. Before the question, I wanted to really thank you. I didn't know you'd set up the Facebook thing. That Facebook thing really did help me, give me a little thread of sanity on which I could cling, because I just thought I was bonkers, and it's like, well, at least there's a bunch of other people who was bonkers as me there. Dear Lord, you know, that's a few years ago, so God bless your heart for doing that.
You guys
And so much of what you said I related to, but the bit that's kind of stayed with me that I wanted to ask you about was the thing about me knowing something that I can't talk about to people that I'm really deeply connected to. And like a slither of a subject, I can talk about anything, but there's this little slither of a subject that just is just not allowed in the space. How do you manage to maintain your connection with those people despite that little kink in the energy? You know, like there's that little thing that you know and I know and we all know. I come here, you know, never met you before, and I feel oddly and beautifully kind of more connected to you than I do to people I'm actually more connected to you than, if that actually makes any bloody sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, how do you manage that?
Well, some of it's easier just because I'm not involved in the day to day. I think it would be a lot harder if I wasn't involved in the day to day. But I mean, I've had to like step away from it. And somebody, I mean, like I said, it's always in my mind. It's always in the background. But you know, I mean, some of it's just straight time. Like it's like you can only focus on the thing that's in front of you. And what's the thing that's in front of me is, you know, I saw that 100 patients last week and I have to chart on all of them. And that meant that I didn't get a weekend because, you know, like the day to day to a certain extent pulls you away from it. And, you know, the people who are in your day to day are part of what's pulling you away. So I think that there's just it's a natural consequence for me. It's a natural consequence of the fact that I just haven't been able to be as involved as I want to be. In a weird way, I almost think like deep adaptation, there's this process that you watch children go through when they start really considering the subject of death, just basic human biological reality of death.
Mm.
And I'm watching my son go through it, and I have been watching my son go through it. And I guess when I decided to be a parent, I never quite realized how difficult it would be to watch a child come to terms with it. And for me, it's been the most heartbreaking part of being a parent. But then I realized recently that to some extent, my own journey towards deep adaptation is very parallel to watching him go through this. It's something, you know, death, for example, is something that we all just at some point or another to continue being a functioning adult come to terms with.
Yeah.
And so I feel like at this point, deep adaptation is exactly the same, or societal collapse, or however you care to put it. It's like, that's just a really horrible fact. But like death, at some point you have to cope with it enough to be a functional human being and not let it get in the way of your relationships. I mean, the people I love, they're the same people that I've always loved. My husband is as close to a soulmate as I'm ever going to get. And yes, it's disturbing to me that I can't get him to see this reality. I would love it if he would, and we could run off to a sheep farm in New Zealand, and you know, and I could be a nice little nurse practitioner in a community full of people there, and try to, you know, find some place for my son to perhaps be one of the survivors. Which I that's a terrible thing to say in a way, but I mean, he's my child, and I think once you're a parent, that's your whole focus is how do I make this possible for my child to live?
Yeah.
So I think maybe in a way I've kind of found a way to cope with it because of him, because I can't go crazy. I can't do all the things that I'd like to do. Like I said, I would love to run away. I can't do that though. I mean, what it would do to him and what it would do to his life. And so I think you learn. I mean, I don't know if that really answers your question, but
Yes.
I think when to me, like the same way, I guess what I'm trying to get at to sort of really make it make sense is the same way we all learn to make just the reality of our own mortality livable so that we can live our life. I have learned to enmesh this idea with everything I think about. And there's this constant awareness, just like someday I'm going to die. Someday real soon society may collapse completely. Okay. All right. My husband is still here. We still understand each other's jokes in a way that I'm never going to understand anybody else. My child grew inside my belly and I love him more than I ever knew I could love anything. Those things are still true. And just deep adaptation is just in the back of my mind, like death.
Yeah. Yeah, not your child, that, yeah. My kids need for me not to go mad, basically.
Yeah.
My kids actually need me to be as spectacularly sane as I can possibly get it together to be right now.
Exactly.
And that deep adaptation. I mean, I haven't been as involved, and I want to be more. So I was interested that you be more involved and aren't as much. And I feel like we're kind of crossing on the road. You're going one way, I'm going the other way. I'm like, oh shit, do I really want to go over there? She's just coming back from over there. Is this a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, and in some ways, just stepping back too has probably helped my sanity. I mean, I think these are hard, just like you can't sit there and think about your own death all the time and function. I think it's been probably good for me to step back a little bit. And I don't know, again, without getting into too much detail, my first year as a nurse practitioner has been kind of a disaster. I think I was really not prepared. And the job I happened to take wound up being in a place that's really more about money than patient care. And so I'm in the middle of trying to change jobs into something that will be a little less demanding while still being a nurse practitioner. And part of it is because I have these things I want to do. I want to, if this is it and this comes about, I want to start learning how to grow my own vegetables. I want to start being more involved in deep adaptation again. I want to be more available to my son and my friends, because even though my work is incredibly meaningful, when this happens, I don't want to have regrets about how I spent time with my family.
Yeah, totally. Got it.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I do want to be more involved again, but at the same time, I really also just want to be there for, maybe the way I'm adapting is just trying to live as much in the moment and be there for the people I love as I can.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Right. He's gonna need me. And also just taking care of myself, because I've probably never been in worse shape in my life. He's gonna need me, when and wherever this happens, whether he's a child, whether he's an adult. And again, in some ways I feel like it's already happening. He's looking to me to be everything, his rock, everything. So I better, I have to keep my shit together.
Yeah. Amen to that. Totally. Thank you.
This is really an honor, you guys. Everybody who keeps saying oh, you did. I feel like I did it for myself. I did the Facebook group for myself. Because I needed so badly at that moment to talk about those ideas. And there still is nobody who's really talking about them. And so for me, honestly, it was a completely selfish act, because it was I just need to talk about this.
Yeah.
Can I please talk about this with somebody?
Yeah.
And in which it's not a debate about is this going to happen or not.
Yeah.
The starting moment is this is happening.
Yeah.
It's that authenticity that people really relate to. Really authentic feeling and authentic motivation is what is really most attractive to each of us. I think that's that anchoring that instead of, I want to do this because of whatever other motivation, when it's really that pure, that's just very attractive and very useful and also very potent. So I think it's spot on.
Yeah, we do. We have to talk about this, and we're not going to be able to talk about it with a lot of other people. So at least there is, you're actually making me miss it now as I'm saying it. It's at least there is a place to, but you make some strange bedfellows, because for example, the one other person at my old job who I used to be able to talk to this about was a Mormon who was extremely politically conservative in many, many ways, was not into environmentalism at all, but I had better conversations with him. He had different ideas about why society was going to collapse. And when I say deeply conservative, I don't mean Trump crazy American conservative. I feel like I always have to preface that now. But the Mormons have this tradition of survivalism, and it's actually part of, I didn't know this, it's actually part of their religion to have a certain amount of food put aside all the time for the end times.
1 year.
Yeah. And So I had some really, really great conversations with him about adaptation. So you meet some really different, interesting people on this journey. You know, it's not all the people you think you meet. Some of them I didn't really want to meet. You know, the one that comes to mind, and I'm sure, you know, whenever Jem sees this, or if he sees this, you know, he'll remember, and I won't go into names, but like, for example, we had a very ugly public spat in the very early days with a fairly well-known Twitter environmentalist who pretty much physically threatened me. And that was pretty, that had never happened to me before. So yeah, not everybody you meet is going to be awesome, but you do meet some very interesting people, and it's great to be able to have a group of people who you can have this conversation with.
Thanks for speaking to this, Sarah. It reminds me that next week there will be a Facebook Live event with the core team and David Baum, Terry LePage, on the topic of how to maintain loving relationships. Well, to stay in loving relationship with people who think very differently from us. So how to get out of the echo chamber and be able to meet those odd bedfellows that you mentioned, right? Because it has to happen. There will always be such a diversity of thought and thinking, yeah, othering a whole portion of the population around oneself may be convenient at first, but perhaps not work in the long term. So it's really great to hear that, yeah, you've been able to have such conversations with that.
I think as time moves, we'll all have more of these conversations, because I mean, if the world has shown us anything this last couple of years, I mean, even without COVID, I remember when Jane and I first started talking, and I was trying to talk my husband into moving, and I thought, well, the only place I'm going to be able to talk him into moving is maybe the Pacific Northwest. And so we had this whole plan of moving to Portland after I graduated. Boy, I'm so glad I'm not in Portland. I'm so glad that didn't work out and I'm not in Portland, because they've had the worst heat waves on record, and it's like on fire. And it also does show you, just as people are more aware of these ideas, and I think more people will come to deep adaptation as time goes on, because it's just becoming so obvious that we can't pretend it isn't happening anymore.
Absolutely. There was a question from Dean in the chat about how to be notified. So Dean, there's an event list in the Professions Network events listing. I'm sure one of us will find the link and paste it here for you. But yeah, you were speaking about the fires in the Pacific Northwest, Sarah, and I've heard that even in New York, people are able to see smoke from those fires. It's just it's quite incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any of that here in DC. I mean, if you had told me that in DC, I would be actually in some ways better insulated than other places, because we've had very little in the way of cataclysmic weather around here. I think we had one early hurricane sort of pass through, but I mean, it's actually been a reasonably mild summer here. But I was ready to pack up. If it hadn't been for COVID, we would have been packing up and off in Oregon. And I think it also just does speak to, I mean, again, my other big plan had been like, I'm going to run away to New Zealand. None of us are going to know when this hits, and none of us are going to know like on what protracted a track it's going to occur. I actually tend to think, I mean, to the little bit I can, that it is going to continue on this like very protracted kind of decline. I don't think it's going to be an all at once. But you know, it's so unpredictable. Every minute it's so unpredictable. You know, New Zealand could be on fire next. I could be so glad that I haven't gone to New Zealand. I don't know.
Definitely. In the end, yeah, it's just how to be comfortable or as accepting as possible of uncertainty and unknowing, right? Or maplessness, as some of us in the forum also call it. Yeah,
I like
absolutely.
that.
Darian, can I ask you about the housekeeping, about the meeting link, because we're a couple of minutes off. and you have a train going past you. So Dorian invited, I think, all of us on the meeting to stay on after the end of the meeting for half an hour to talk about the meeting, because the research that the two of us are doing together is action research. So it's actively what's happening for you and looking at what's happening for you. And I really don't know if Sarah has the time to, but it'd be wonderful if you could stay, Sarah, and if anyone else wants to join us just for a think through of some of the great stuff that's come up and how it's hit, how it's landed.
I'd love to. I'd love to, as long as you guys don't mind that I eat my lunch in the meantime.
No, fabulous.
No,
Yeah,
cool.
very deep adaptation.
That'd be great. I missed you guys.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and thanks for reminding us of this, Wendy. So yeah, just it would be an extra half hour to yeah, just process anything that came up for us and share reflections on what we heard. Yeah.
So do we
Are
just
there
say
any other?
or-
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we still have 3 minutes in the official time for the call. So I don't know if anyone else has other remarks or questions. That Fred, you're going to have to take off soon.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to say before you left?
The big thing, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Dorian, actually, because it would just help me declutter and jump back into what else is going on around me, which is nothing to do with this at all. So it'll help that feel a little less bizarre. The piece that we were just speaking to about the future, you know, is it going to be like this? Is it going to be like that? Is it going to be like the other? It's just a reflection of how life is, even if collapse isn't being talked about. You know, I know my life is going to end, but I've no idea when, and I have no idea how. And that is how that is. And the best, you know, the best I personally can make of that is to be as present in the minute of life that I've got now, this little slither that's happening right in this very second. If I can keep myself as often as possible anchored to that, I reckon I'll be all right, and not worry about whether they all lived happily ever after or not. Oh, big out breath. Yeah. Thank you for letting me put that in my space, in my head, if nowhere else.
Thank you so much for this, Fred. Yeah, I see that. Igor, you also have to go. Was there anything else you wanted to, any few words before you left, you wanted to say?
Well, I liked the thought about the story. You don't know that we have and Wendy also, that we have a cartoon called The New Story of Earth. And this is my main thing, to make a short story accessible even for children about what's going on and how did it happen. And it's completely, it's rational, but it's not the stories that have been told in school or we've been told, because it's not about different facts or UFOs or whatever, but it's about like different look and different like mosaic of these facts. And this cartoon will be soon in English, and it's only 6 minutes and quite deep. So if somebody is interested in like presenting this film, promoting it together, it is very interesting. Please find me, and others just wait for it to see it. And now it's like a sound recording of English version in a Swedish eco village is going on.
Thank you so much, Igor. I love your cartoon. I'm sure we'll find ways of sharing it much more widely in the forum.
I say one
You've got a lot of feedback on your microphone, scratchiness.
Could I just say one last thing? So it's interesting that you say that about we're not presenting that to kids, Igor, because again, you know, we talked about that a little bit, but you know what, kids really need these ideas too, because they're going to be the ones who go forward. And I include my own son in that. And, you know, there's a tendency to think that they can't handle it. But again, you know, clearly I watch too much TV. Okay, so I don't know if anybody saw Sweet Tooth on Netflix. again, I watch far too much TV. Okay, it was amazing. Okay, and the whole premise is, and it's a little close to home, is again, there's this idea that there's a disease that comes out, and it's hard to tell which is first, but there are also at the same time these animal human hybrids that occur. But it's a kids show. It's an apocalyptic kids show, and my son loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. The storytelling as we move forward is going to be so important, and especially the story, how we tell this story for kids to help them understand what's coming.
Amen. Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah. Well, did anyone else want to come in with some interesting takeaways from my conversation so far? Sasha? And then Chris?
Yeah, I think Chris put his hand up first, and I can just go after that. So.
Sorry about that, Chris. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I also want to thank you. That was really interesting. I didn't really know what it was about, to be honest. I just knew it was this conscious learning thing. I also have to leave, so I just quickly wanted to say that, yeah, a lot what you talked about was resonated a lot with me. Like, I mean, the whole talk that you had with Fred was really interesting. I think I'm quite privileged in this way, in that it also could be seen kind of as echo chamber kind of way, but I'm surrounded mostly by people who believe in this, or at least are willing to listen, even though they don't necessarily agree. Yeah, and the whole stories thing I find incredibly interesting, and I think it's great that people are on that, because the collective I work with in Berlin, Camp Collapse, we are also trying to basically get people to think through stories and, yeah, not come with this scientific data to begin with, but kind of engage them in their own imaginations, thinking about the future, how it's going, how it relates to their present, and so on. And so far, that's been a good way, I think. So in a way, like trying to engage people with stories and then potentially let them go deeper with workshops or something like this. And yeah, I think we will do a lot more of these things for the rest of this year. So I hope that there will also be some learnings that I can share with other deep adaptation people after.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, if you or anyone else would like to actually convene a conversation just like this one today, please feel free to jump in. You know, it could be just you wanting to share any new thread of thought that you're having, or feelings about deep adaptation, or some a certain approach, or any kind of skills that you feel could help others to learn how to deepen their engagement with this whole philosophy and set of ideas. We're actually going to have our next webinar with Jane here on August 20. So I hope that everyone can join. There will be another one with Jem on September 4th. And I know that David Baum, Kat, and others here, Igor too, I think you're involved in putting together some other offerings. So yeah, just to say that we would like this to be as participatory as possible. So yeah. Gwen, I saw that you had your hand up a few seconds ago.
I think Sasha was first.
I can go, Gwen. Yeah, I'll go. And first, I just want to thank you, Dorian and Wendy, for this. I also, even though probably if I had read things thoroughly, I would have known what to expect, but I didn't. And what a inviting title, and I have a lot of trust in you too, of doing something that would be valuable. And wow, it really has been. I didn't know that Sarah had founded the Facebook group, and I think that as I've been listening, that caused me to reflect on how important that Facebook group has been to me. Even though I don't participate hardly at all now, I did in the beginning, and the interactions there really helped me find my place and find something, a way to engage with this that's been amazingly valuable to me. And also I've been reflecting on when I did come into deep adaptation, which was fairly early on after the paper. I also was in that place of like deep anguish and feeling that I couldn't talk to anybody, or even people who maybe agreed with me really didn't want to talk about it. And finding the events like Deep Listening and Death Cafe was amazing for me. I just was able to move through so many layers of grief that not only has it helped me with the whole concept of deep adaptation, it's just helped me feel like more at home in my skin and in my life. So, and how significant that Facebook group has been for me as the landing pad. So thank you.
It's really, it's amazing. I mean, this is, when Dorian asked me to do this, I had no idea, because honestly, like I said, I walked away from it when I had to, and it's really, and like I said, I started the group because I needed it, and I think that's the other thing is, I think as we're all talking, I'm realizing there is this, what it's most useful for in some ways really is for people who are just coming to this idea, perhaps. That maybe that's the best way to think about it, because when you first get into it, it's so earth shattering and you have to talk about it. But then there does come a point where you're like, all right, I got it now. And you don't need it quite so badly. You don't need those conversations. But I mean, I did it for myself, but I can't tell you how incredibly meaningful it is to me to find that it helped anybody do anything. So thank you very much. You've given me a huge gift today in this. I really had no idea.
Can I interrupt for a second? So Gwen is next, and I see Roger's got his hand up. But can I just say, if anyone does need to leave, we've loved having you here with us. And wow, what a fantastic conversation. And normally in deep adaptation Zoom calls, we do a nice gentle lead in and a grounding, and we do a nice gentle checkout. And we haven't really had a chance to do that because it's a pretty intense webinar. But just to say, we see you and we hear you. And thank you everyone that's been on the call. It's really been a wonderful energy. And I'm going to pass to Gwen, unless Dorian wanted to put something else in there.
Thanks,
And then
Wendy.
Roger.
I'm reminded as a developmental psychologist of how very, very important reflection is. And so I'm so happy that you're doing this project, and it's really wonderful. It's important individually and for the group as well. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you for being with us, Gwen. It's lovely. Yeah. Roger?
Yeah, I just wanted to, Sasha, thank you for how you framed your reflection on DA, and also Sarah, because I've had pretty much similar feelings from that standpoint. When you trying to figure out who you are, where you are, what you are, it's nice to be in a pool of something who are throwing up all sorts of things, and then notice what you notice and notice what you respond with. And I don't know about anyone else, but at least for me, I'm not sure what I think until I say it. It's being a little bit more verbal, but that's how it's DA has landed with me also. It's like, okay, where is the takeaway? There's something in here that lands that brought me in early. And then I saw a whole bunch of things going on. Okay, I'm not interested in that bit. This is interesting. Well, yeah, well, no, we don't do that here. We do that over there. Okay, let's go over there then. And in so doing, the way you talked about that much more succinctly, Sasha, is that you discover yourself. Where am I in this? And in that sense, I don't see, and I ran into this also when I lived in the Finhorn Foundation for many, many years. I always wondered whether the organization is something for everybody for a long time, or it's a step on a ladder. because it really is fundamentally different on how you think about developing something in a group or something, depending on what its fit is. And for me, it's a step on a ladder. Whether it's a step on a ladder of awareness, you come in, you learn, you sift, etc. Then at a certain point in time, okay, I don't need to hear this again or this. Now where am I? And that's how I heard what you said, Sasha, to some degree, in finding it. And that's, I think, where I am also. So I find myself sort of, okay, I don't need this right now. I find it incredibly interesting, and there's interesting people like yourselves here that I've met. But I do see that, I think, fundamentally as a step in awakening, a step on a ladder. And that brings up, well, what's next? You know, what moves groups forward? And I see a lot of that, Dorian and Wendy and others in the forum trying to explore that. But I think that if it's tried to be explored inside the frame of DA, that may be a limited frame to think in.
I remember really early on in the Facebook group, I think it became very apparent that in some ways the Facebook group had a very particular function for people, which was the function that I had it for myself, which is when you first come to terms or start coming to terms with this idea, you need to be able to talk to people, and you need to be able to talk to people without getting into wind up on the outside, which is trying to just argue about, oh, this isn't real. No, it is. Yes, it isn't. And then I remember, I don't think he's still with it, but Justin, who was one of the people that I became friends with through DA, you know, he's like, okay, this is an on-ramp for a lot of people. It's the entrance point. But then how do you then help people onto the next thing? And you're right, I don't know what the next thing is. And I don't know whether it fits in deep adaptation or whether it's something else. But yeah, I think that in many ways, that's the Facebook, it became the Facebook group was its primary purpose. I didn't know that at the time, but that's really what it is, I think. And in a way, and it was interesting how you could see people organize themselves, because there seemed to, at least when I was there, it did seem like there was a group of people who almost were like the welcoming committee. You know, when somebody new would come on, or when new people would come on, and they would be like this huge outpouring of grief and coming to terms with it, there always were these sort of stalwart people there who would be there to sort of offer a comforting hand, and say, yes, I know, I've been there, I've been exactly where you were. And it's a little bit like a Narcotics Anonymous meeting or something like that, you know. You have to have those people in the group. You have to have the people who are willing to be the greeters in a way. But I don't know that, yeah, it's interesting. I'd be curious to hear about what's happening now in terms of like, okay, that's the on-ramp. Now what's the off-ramp? How are you directing people into what will next be meaningful after the Facebook group?
I wonder if we can ask Kat to have a go at answering that. Are you ready? Shall I have a go?
I can try. Sarah, I'll add my gratitude to everybody else, as I was a very early member. I don't participate in social media, so I'm a reluctant member of the Facebook group, and I interfere from time to time, as Jane will let you know. I love this idea of the Facebook group as the on-ramp, because for me, it's the waiting room, it's the reception. People arrive and they're in the reception room. And what's been really gratifying in the last 12 to 18 months particularly, and perhaps fueled by COVID and the fact that people were more present at home and had more leisure because they weren't commuting for hours, but just the explosion of offerings and interests and groups that are forming away from the Facebook group. So I still perceive the Facebook group very much as that reception area. People arrive, they fall through the door and go, oh my God, is this real? What's happening? Help, help, help. But now we have, and we've taken, with Jem's departure, we've become a lot less hierarchical. So we're a really flat and level structure. So there's loads of effort going on within the core team to create the scaffolding to support people to pursue their own interests and their own aspirations. So the Professionals Network has really died a death, other than promoting various events. But in terms of events, we have dozens of offerings month on month, all different ways of engaging with deep adaptation, or with the spectre that is collapse, or with their own personal processing of grief and difficult emotions. So we have a huge number of events that are being offered within the community, still for free. We have Slack channels set up where people are coalescing around challenges associated with education or communications, or there's a really active business and finance group who are meeting regularly and conceiving of pathways towards how do we bring deep adaptation thinking into our industry, into business, into what we're doing. There are people working around education, talking about how do we introduce this at school level, what might some of the curriculum. So I think Roger's absolutely right. People will arrive, they'll go, oh, I feel so much better now, I'm ready to tackle something, I'm ready to get involved. Perhaps a year or 18 months ago, there wasn't a way for them to do that within deep adaptation. We were so young and so immature that possibility didn't exist. Now we're maturing and growing. Actually, the possibilities are infinite. And you can bring up any topic that is of interest for you to explore. And we as a core team and all of these incredible people you see on the screen in front of you gift hours and hours and hours of their time to this endeavor. We'll do what we can to facilitate that. So we weave the networks, we put people in contact, we create opportunities for accidental conversations, we provide what we can in terms of infrastructure. Hopefully in time, we'll get to the point where we can be generating funds that can support people. And at the same time, people are learning, and you modeled this yourself, Sarah, when you set up that Facebook group, the flavor, the way we are with this, the way we communicate with one another, the way we engage with conflict, the way we're now making decisions. These are incredible skills that will have so much value at a local level, because our adaptation can only happen where we live. But the skills we're learning around who am I, how do I make decisions, how do I deal with conflict, how do I manage the difficult emotions, how do we share the decision making, where's the wisdom that we're considering, how broadly. I think all of what people learn within deep adaptation now and into the future will be incredibly powerful for their personal adaptations in the space where they live. And that's enough from me.
Thank you so much, Kat. To me, one of the key, I think what you just mentioned speaks to what has been one of the key learnings for me in this conversation, which is how incredibly important it is to create the containers for conversations which can transform people. And that is not, it requires infrastructure, right? It requires having the technology, but it also requires having the people power who are there with a spirit, with a culture that is there ready to spread and to invite others into it. Right? So this role of the conveners of spaces and conversation to me is absolutely crucial for personal and collective learnings. And this has really been a powerful reminder of that. Sasha?
Yeah, Dorian, when you said that, it reminds me that there was a lot of modeling for me. So I came into the Facebook group and started to find what interested me. And as Roger said, then I kind of went in another direction. I said, oh, there's a professional platform over here. I'll go over there. Oh, maybe I want to do this and that. And I just, for me, I was one of those people, I got just so far, and then it wasn't as satisfying. And there were some people who, whether consciously or not, then functioned as models and mentors. For instance, Kat Suarez was one of them. Actually, probably most people here in this group. And I think that for me, that's one of the values in this group is it attracts people that I admire. There's something about this topic that attracts people that have qualities that I really admire. And then we get to share those. So maybe some people learn from me, but then I learn from them things that I might not have known how to do myself.
Thanks, Sasha. Yeah. Modeling and mentoring. Mirror images. Those are associations that often come up in the conversations that Wendy and I are having in this research with many people. Jane, did you want to come in on this?
I just wanted to add that this is one of the reasons I started the Northeast US DA Facebook group, was to get, because it's going to all be local. And because I've had the privilege of accepting new members, as I see people who live in Vermont, I email them and say, do you want to join our Vermont DA group? And we have about 30 or 40 people in that. And we were meeting in person before COVID. And actually we're talking about meeting in person again now, because it's not too bad in Vermont.
Yeah.
And in the Northeast Facebook group, all the people who live in New York City organize themselves, and they've started meeting. You know, to me, this is how it's going to be. Anyway.
Definitely to bring this from the online into the offline, so to speak, or to localize the knowledge which is gathered on the global internet sphere.
Can I say
Roger?
something else? Yeah. Just in listening to this, it also makes me feel a little bit emotional around it, because Sarah, when I was listening to you describing, like, you and your husband are not on the same page on that topic, and yet this topic is so deep. And it is easy to, we have a bucket of awareness, and awareness is a finite object. And so we'll throw our awareness elsewhere, or our world takes our awareness elsewhere, and that kind of fades to the background. And I'm lucky because my wife and I are absolutely on the same page, from that standpoint. And so we can talk together or whatever. It's not the center of our life, but we're on the same page. But I also realize that there is I live here outside Stockholm. There is no one else that we have to talk to. Just literally no one from that standpoint. It's not that they're not understanding. We're involved in environmental groups and a little grassroots action group here on environment, and my wife has been a local politician. We've had our own political party to try to get things done, looking at local again, like you were saying. But I noticed that I do enjoy engaging with people like yourselves, whether it's through the Facebook platform to some degree or practical in particular, because at least there's an opportunity to engage on the topic and either drain off a charge that's building up or learn something from that. So Sarah, my heart goes out a little bit from the standpoint of the challenge around not having someone so close and dear to which can share that bit. And yet I understand. I see, like you're deciding, there's a lot on your plate. Fine, deal with your plate. That's what life's about. We deal with our plate, and our plate's in front of us. We can have all sorts of other stuff. But I have appreciated the various people I've met here and there and engaging in that way, and realizing I don't have that in my family. Back in the US, I don't have that in the neighborhood here. I've introduced Jem's paper or the ideas a few times, and then I wait to see if they come back. They don't come back, and I don't push. They're good people. We just see things a little bit differently. But I have really valued that conversational community to a degree. So, yeah.
Thanks, Roger. What I'm really hearing is that and just Sarah, also from your curiosity and interest in some of the stuff that's going on, there's probably a place for an alumni of Deep Adaptation on an email that just comes through, say, once a month. So it's not taking, it's not taking much of your time, but it's like a tranche of all these great events and meetings and things, because I think anyone who is DA aware is welcome back anytime, any of the things. So I can see Kat going, yeah, okay, so this is a thing. We're going to have Deep Adaptation alumni, and Sarah, you're going to be the first person to be invited to be on that list.
When you said that, the first thing I thought about was Deep Adaptation survivors.
Is it the equivalent of getting your chip? It's the equivalent of you earn your chip. And we have Jane would have been nodding as well, because we talked about this a little bit at Holding Group, this concept of DA elders. People who have survived and have tales.
Yeah, Survivor is exactly right too, because I mean that, you know, as much as I miss it, like I said, there's some parts that I don't miss at all. Like I said, the physical threatening, not so much. You know, and all that conflict in the beginning. I mean, there was just so much conflict, and sometimes it would just get so ugly. You know, so there is a little bit of a Survivor thing about like, wow, I stuck with that and got through that a little bit. But I think, yeah, I love that idea. I love the idea of a newsletter or something for us old timers.
Well, and the interesting thing is because of another thing I had to do, I checked to see how many people have been removed from the group, and only 18.
Wow.
Which is amazing with over 13,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been ages since we removed somebody, ages.
Yeah.
It was really all in the beginning because people were stressed and didn't get it, I think.
Well, and there's a lot of tension. I think there was a lot of tension in the beginning about, I mean, and I have to imagine some of that's still there, but you guys would tell me, you know, I felt like right in the beginning, there was also this like sort of hardcore binary approach, you know, that you had the people who were like, we accept this and we're, you know, the sort of Neville shoot on the beach kind of thing about like, this is coming, there's nothing we can do. How do we adapt to this spiritually? And then there's the people who are like, no, I accept that this is real, but how am I going to survive it? And I don't know how much that tension is still there, but that was the central tension, it seemed to me. And I think it's even a tension within myself too. But to me, that was the hardest part about being a moderator of that group, was like the people who wanted to talk about guns all the time. Oh God, wanted to talk about guns and survivalism all the time. Remember those early conversations about guns where you always be like, no, we're not talking about that. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that.
That sounds like it must have been such a difficult role to play as a moderator. I can't even imagine.
It was.
It does. It also seems like, at least from my perspective, you really set it on a good path. So because those conversations, it was the ethic that Jim brought about a loving response, but that you moderated in alignment with that, so that it's come forward. So gratitude again.
Exactly.
Well, that definitely was Jim. I mean, he was very clear right from the beginning that we were not going to become this survivalist group, which, you know, I think that there's benefits and pitfalls. I mean, I think that was part of the reason that I did do the practical DA group, because but he was very clear that this was not going to be, you know, something where we all talked about like, you know, fighting down to the last morsel of food. It wasn't going to be like that. We wanted to be doing something that was more positive than that. And I know that, you know, I know a lot of people have discomfort with the word positive, and I, you know, as a cynical Gen X, I get that. I really, really do. And I sort of feel it in my cynical bones. But I think the intent to not let it devolve, because I mean, there were really plenty of times right in the beginning when it could have easily devolved into that.
Sometimes love is delivered through a laser.
Oh,
if it's necessary.
That's a nice way to put it. I'll remember that. Thanks, Roger. So, everyone, we're reaching the we're reaching the end of the extra half hour that we allocated for that call. So I'm wondering if anything else needs to be said or heard before we go off. Perhaps we could each have a quick checkout, just say in a few words how we're leaving this conversation.
I'll say thank you, Dorian. Thank you, Wendy. And absolutely thank you, Sarah. It's been really nice to actually have a, dare I say, 2D rather than even just 1D meeting with you. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you to also Wendy and Dorian and Sarah. And what a great way to do it, with an hour of presentation, an hour of kind of I love the concept. I'll be back for sure.
Yeah, don't stress me out. I'm next.
And I'm gonna come with a list of really hard questions.
Maybe you could help me build my greenhouse instead. Anyway, it's nice to lay eyes on you, Sarah.
Jane, I've been the worst friend ever. I missed you talking to you though. I didn't even recognize your phone number. Oh my God.
I think not recognizing phone numbers is becoming a thing in these days. I mean, I don't remember many. I want to thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us, for being willing to take part in this webinar. Wendy for co-organizing with me, and everyone for joining. Thanks so much.
Thanks again so much for even caring about anything that I would have to say about anything. You know, I really, really appreciate this, guys, because like, again, I just did what I needed to do for me. And I won't lie, I did hope that there would be other people who would need it and find it useful, but I had no idea. And so it's incredibly meaningful to me to feel like I actually did something good in the world, because you don't always know that you're doing something good in the world.
Yeah.
So I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sorry I was such a flake about dates and everything at times, and I'm sorry I was late.
You did something better than good in the world, Sarah. You did something incredible. Bless you. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to meet you, because you were just a name and now you're this whole three-dimensional, incredible woman juggling a life and all of the other concerns. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone else for the conversation. It's been just lovely to sit here and hear it all. It's I can get up and do it all again tomorrow now.
Thanks, everyone. I add my thanks and very, very, very grateful.
All right. So hope to see you all again on August 20th for a conversation with Jane. And if not, we'll share a recording.
Good,
So,
good.
all
I
right.
may be on the road. That's why I say good. So thank you, folks.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great chat.
All right. Bye-bye.